Hello, this is Brett. Welcome back. Today is May 21st, 2019, and I have another reading for you of the 7th Vial by James Aiken Wiley. We are just over halfway in the book now on the chapter titled The Two-Horned Beast of the Earth. Quote, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon," unquote. Revelation 13. We intend here simply to indicate in a few brief sentences who this lamb-like beast is, and then pass on the grand catastrophe. It is the ecclesiastical hierarchy which we take to be here symbolized. The vision brings the Pope again before us. Only in the beast of the sea he is seen as the ruling head of the 10 papal kingdoms. Here he is beheld as the ruling head of the papal clergy. This beast rose up out of the earth, the symbol of the Western Empire, in its tranquilized state. He had 2 horns like a lamb. The key of the symbol is found in our Lord's warning, quote, "Beware of them that come to you in sheep's clothing," unquote. Such was the clothing in which the beast of the earth appeared, a circumstance which fixes upon him a clerical character. The 2 horns indicate the 2 kinds of dominion which were to center in the ruling head of that body, the civil and the sacerdotal. The Pope united the imperial diadem with the mitre. He grasped the sword of the Caesars together with the keys of St. Peter. We may adduce the bull of Boniface VIII, commonly called Unum Sanctum, as affording a good commentary upon the symbol of the 2 horns. This bull attributes to the Church and the Pope 2 swords, the spiritual and the temporal. The former to be exercised by the Church, the latter for it. The former to be, let me go back here. This papal bull, Unum Sanctum, attributes to the Church and the Pope 2 swords, the spiritual and the temporal. The former to be exercised by the Church, the latter for it, the former by the sacerdotal, and the latter by the regal and military hand. But at the nod and sufferance of the priest, according to the commission given to Jeremiah, quote, "So I have this day set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down and to destroy and to throw down, to build and to plant," unquote. There are some who understand the 2 orders of the Pope's clergy, the regular and the monastic, as being intended by the symbol. These were sufficient, distinct, and sufficiently powerful to answer the 2 horns. The beast of the earth, then, was a pretended minister of Christ. We say pretended because while he had horns like a lamb, quote, "he spake as a dragon," unquote. The dragon is the symbol of pagan Rome. The popes displayed all the lust, cruelty, ambition, tyranny of the Caesars. But it was in his speech mainly that he was to display the characteristics of the dragon which clearly points to the characteristics of his teachings. The religion which the hierarchy of Rome inculcated was paganism, very slightly disguised. The doctrine of the popes was the doctrine of devils. And, quote, "And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him," i.e., delegation. The clergy were vested in the same powers as the Pope. They could loose and bind. They could offer sacrifice for sins. In short, perform every ghostly function which the Pope could do. In virtue of powers received from him, they discharged the functions of both horns. By ecclesiastics, mostly were the temporal affairs of the 10 kingdoms managed. And all this power the second beast exercised in the way of being accountable to the first, and for the purpose of subversing his interests. Thus it is added, quote, "And he causeth the earth and them who dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed," unquote. The papal clergy were the great preachers of passive obedience. They bound the people neck and heel and laid them at the foot of the civil power. They were the grand supporters of both secular and spiritual despotism. Though their instrumentality mainly was the world plunged into slavery and kept enslaved for many ages, for so many ages, no human power can prevent a people enlightened by religion from achieving their independence, and no human power can make a superstitious and ignorant people other than slaves. What advances might the world have made in the knowledge of both the principles of civil liberty and of physical science, had it not been for these men who have been the grand obstacles of progress of every kind. Let me read that sentence again. I butchered it. What advances might the world have made in the knowledge of both the principles of civil liberty and of physical science, had it not been for these men who have been the grand obstacles to progress of every kind, great discoveries in physics and mechanics, which have distinguished our times, would have been made years ago, and much more numerous, beautiful, and useful applications of them have been known at this day, which are still to be found out. The laws by which nations are to be governed, commerce carried on, and the intercourse of states with one another regulated, are only beginning to be understood. And why only now? Because mind was completely overborne by a set of men who placed all virtue and wisdom in the maxim that the world should worship the beast. And he doeth great wonders, quote unquote. Who has not heard of the pretended miracles of the Popish Church, the palpable cheats, gross delusions, and impudent falsehoods which she has practiced in support of her authority? Transubstantiation alone which her priests are performing every day, were enough to confer on that church unrivaled preeminence as a wonder worker. Nor are the wonders of the beast sometimes a very harmless kind. Quote, he maketh fire to come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Unquote. He has not arrogated to himself the power of wielding at will the thunderbolts of God. What dreadful curses with bell, book, and candle has he not pronounced on the persons, goods, and souls of his victims? These anathemas struck terror into the hearts of the hearts of the bravest, and laid the mightiest monarchs prostrate in the dust. No armies, no human might could avail the man against whom had been launched the thunders of the 7 hills. The fire of heaven could not have been more innumerous or deadly. With this fire, how often has the Pope scathed whole nations at once? When the sentence of excommunication was thundering against a kingdom, what wailing, despair, suffering overspread it? The whole course of life was instantly arrested. The churches were closed, the sacraments were interdicted, and whoever died while the excommunication was in force, his body lay unburied, and his soul was cast out of paradise. Quote, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast. Unquote. It was the help of these impostors, that the clergy kept up the authority of the Pope, quote, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had a wound by a sword and did live. Unquote. The beast that received the wound was the old Roman Empire. From the Gothic sword did it receive what seemed to be its death blow. But it lived again in the 10 kingdoms, united and governed by the papacy. Okay, this is what is very interesting, about this viewpoint of the deadly wound being healed, the pagan and papal Roman Empire, or empires as we can call them, because it's a succession. First you have pagan Rome, then you have it morph into papal Rome over the course of, 100, 200 years between, Caesar there, all of that from Caesar to, I forget his name now. This horrible Pope, and this emperor, that 606. How come I can't remember this right now? Geesh, too much information. I should have it all written down in front of me, but I don't. Anyway, that is the purpose of doing these sessions that I'm doing now. These are a preparatory sessions for the bulk of the work that I have ahead of me. But I don't know for sure if I'm going to release these on my main channel or not yet. I'm thinking I'll put him up on my second channel. But anyway, Pope, I'm trying to remember his name now. Boniface the Eighth, I think it is. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. I think it was Boniface the Eighth in 606 who got his power from this emperor. I'm trying to remember his name. It's just really, really wicked history back then. But that's the reality that we face is we don't do enough independent research on our own of the history, and it's such a bloody and tragic history. I think it's a shame that more people don't know it because it's very obvious, when you study this out, what the real problem is. And these gigantic, what should we call them? Tyrants become more apparent as you study these histories. So let's get right back to it. From the Gothic sword did it receive what seemed to be its death blow, but it lived again in the 10 kingdoms united and governed by the papacy. This last was a faithful imitation of the former. Its head arrogated more than the supremacy and extent of dominion possessed by the Caesars. And its religion was just a revival of paganism. So that papal Europe was but the image of pagan Europe. Nevertheless, the clergy wrought so admirably with their wonders that they gained the consent of a blinded world that this image should be set up and held in universal veneration. Quote, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, unquote. It was no dead, It was no dead painting. There was life in the image, and the clergy breathed that life into it in discharge of their main function, which was to proclaim the supremacy and divinity of the Pope. Quote, that the image of the beast should both speak, unquote. Speak in blasphemy against God by arrogating his titles and powers, and speak in anathemas against the saints, quote, them that dwell in heaven, unquote, by denouncing all who would not worship him as heretics, and delivering over their bodies to be burned. Quote, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name, unquote. It was customary in ancient times for servants and soldiers to have imprinted on their persons the mark of their master and commander. The mark was sometimes a hieroglyphic, sometimes the capital letters of the name, sometimes the name in full. Popery, too, required its supporters to wear its mark, more or less conspicuously, if not in their forehead, yet in their right hand. That mark consisted in the profession of the Romish faith, without which Rome would not permit any man to enjoy either natural or civil rights. Quote, "No man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name," unquote. From instances almost innumerable, we shall select only one. Pope Martin V, in his bull issued soon after the Council of Constance, enjoined the professors of the Catholic faith not to permit heretics to have houses in their districts, or enter into contracts, or carry on commerce, or enjoy the comforts of humanity with Christians. This furnishes a striking point of resemblance between the beast whose deadly wound was healed and the image of that beast, between the dragon and the dragon's successor, which, though it were the lamb's skin, had the dragon's voice. For we find an edict issued against the primitive Christians by the pagan emperor Diocletian, in precisely similar terms. According to that edict, quote, "The Christians," unquote, says Justin Martyr, "had not the power of buying or selling anything, nor were they allowed the liberty of drawing water itself, before they had offered incense to detestable idols," unquote. We might go on in this way, presenting the portraiture of popery, but many volumes would not suffice to contain it, and a whole lifetime would not be long enough to finish it. Imagine that. This is what's missing from the picture today, as far as I can tell. You know, our idea of the mark of the beast being a future thing, it's not future. It's past, and it's present. It is still present. Yeah, boy, so much to consider. Okay, here we are to the next chapter on page 231. The commencement and termination of the 1260 days. I'm going to see how long this chapter is here quick. Okay, I think I will continue. Yes, I will continue. So, we now come to discuss the question of time. There is a certain period fixed by God between the birth and death of every man. The same providence, by an irresistible decree, has determined the days of the man of sin. I'm going to start this over. Okay, here we are. The commencement and termination of the 1260 days. We now come to discuss the question of time. There is a certain period fixed by God between the birth and death of every man. The same providence, by an irresistible decree, has determined the days of the man of sin. Between his appearance above the dark flood and his descent into his burning grave, an interval will elapse of 1,260 years. This number occurs in the Apocalypse in connection with the existence of Antichrist. Not less than 5 times, the Gentiles were to tread the holy city underfoot 40 and 2 months. The witnesses were to prophesy, clothed in sackcloth, 1,260 days. The women fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God for 1,260 days. And in the wilderness she was nourished for a time, times and half a time. Power was given unto the beast of the sea to continue 40 and 2 months. The period is variously expressed in days, months, times, but its length is the same in all, 1,260 days or years. The prophecy of Daniel 2 limits the duration of Antichrist to the same period, a time, times, and the dividing of time. Thus, as regards the length of the period, there is no doubt the papacy cannot possibly survive its 1,260th year, dated from its rise. This is the hour of its doom, beyond which neither craft nor power can prolong its existence. Then it goeth into perdition. The main point here, then, is to ascertain the period of the rise of the papacy, 1,260 years, added to that will give the epoch of its fall. Of course, its rise must be placed subsequent to the Gothic invasion. For out of that flood did the 10 kingdoms emerge. The 10 kingdoms, as we have already stated, were completed by the opening of the 6th century. Okay, this is what I was trying to explain here earlier. But anyway, I'll just shut up and read for now. We are not, therefore, to look for the full development of the papacy before that century, nor are we to look for it at any era very much subsequent, as must be evident from our former explanations that the 10 kingdoms of Europe, united and governed by the Pope, their last and 8th head forms the beast of the abyss, whose continuance is limited to 42 months. Do we find any strongly marked epoch occurring soon after the commencement of this century in the history of the 10 kingdoms or of the papacy? Do we find any signal change in the constitution of the first, or any signal enlargement or confirmation in the powers and claims of the second? We do. About the year 530, we find a change passing upon the 10 Gothic kingdoms, which made them, in fact, Roman kingdoms, and linked them to the fourth monarchy of Daniel, and made them, in truth, but a continuation of that Roman Empire to which the invasion had given a deadly wound. From AD 530 to AD 533, Gibbon tells us the Emperor Justinian published his immortal works, the Code of Pandects and Institutes. These contained a digest of the laws of the ancient Roman Empire, which henceforward became the law of the 10 kingdoms.